Alright, let's talk about progress. Progress is like a promise that we've been trained to believe in. So things are moving forward, they're getting better, they're advancing. We're kind of told that history itself blends toward progress. It's almost like we don't have a choice. We're told our lives should always be about progress. Becoming more efficient, more successful, more adult, more optimized. And today, with, things like the rise of AI and billionaires casting themselves as prophets and, political debates that feel like they're pulling us toward one grand and terrifying future, the idea of progress has kind of become less of a comfort and more of a haunting. And honestly, it kind of annoys me. And that's why I want to talk about what I will call the spook of progress. Because progress isn't just a neutral description of change, it's an ideal that governs us. It's a demand that we internalize, and it's a story that we tell ourselves that denies fragility, contradiction, and incoherence. All the things that kind of make us valid in ourselves, just for being here, just for existing, which I don't know about you, but nobody asked me if I wanted to be here. Progress kind of whispers that we have to overcome these flaws and that history is carrying us to some better horizon. But I have a different thesis. My thesis is that progress is a spook, and the alternative to progress is not regression, which is also a spook, nor stagnation, which is also a spook. It's actually ownness. I think it's important to talk about this right now because we're being bombarded with this spectacle. And I think people lose sight of the fact that this is all it is. It is just a spectacle. Every day, someone is warning that AI will either save us or destroy us. And, tech billionaires frame themselves as like the guardians of humanity's future, and politicians weaponize accelerationist fantasies or fears of decline. The future has become a stage play where fear-mongering replaces thought and spectacle replaces life. And honestly, I think most of this is unnecessary. It's literally just noise. It's a way of distracting us from the fact that we're fragile beings who don't need to pledge ourselves to some collective destiny or even a personal destiny. So like I said in this episode, I want to unspook progress. First, in the Spook of the Week segment, I'm going to look at how the spook shows up in today's culture, and AI discourse and accelerationism and the way billionaires present themselves and stuff like that. Then in the next segment, in the Dissecting the Spook segment, I'll go a little deeper and I'm going to draw on philosophers and figures like Nick Land, Nick Bostrom, Mark Fisher, Peter Thiel's philosophical background. Yes, I will. And, even people like Elon Musk and Sam Altman and all the stuff that they've been yapping about. And after that, in the Living Ownness segment, I'm going to kind of turn inward into how the psyche kind of creates traps for us, and how the superego locks us into history, and like this notion of we, and how Shina's idea of a life apart points us toward ownness in a very unique way. And finally, in the spotlight, I will analyze texts by Peter Thiel and Sam Altman to show just how riddled with neurosis they actually are. So let's start pulling at this thread. Let's see what happens when we stop letting progress haunt us. So progress is supposed to feel good, I guess. I mean, that's kind of the point of it, I think, is that we're supposed to have like goals and a future to look forward to and all that jazz. It's supposed to be the thing that reassures us. Don't worry, humanity is on the right track. You are on the right track. But lately, progress feels less like a march forward and more like being dragged into a carnival fun house where every mirror either makes you look like a demigod or like you're about to die in the next apocalypse. And the thing is, the carnival doesn't actually end, right? It's everywhere. It just keeps like reinventing itself. So let's talk about some of the symptoms of what I will call progress dysphoria, which is like the way the spook of progress is haunting us right now. Let's talk about AI as apocalypse and salvation. I don't know about you, but every time I open YouTube, there's another AI doomer thumbnail screaming at me with stuff like AI will destroy humanity by 2030 or some shit. Or just like popular YouTubers like making fun of AI slop or whatever. But it's all kind of framed in this like, oh, the future, like, is this really what our lives are going to be like? Is this really what we have to do something to protect ourselves from the inauthenticity of this? And honestly, I'm just kind of sick of it. Then on the other side, there are also people who are posting videos about how AI is going to cure cancer and like usher in the utopia and all this. I don't know. And like, if you ask yourself, like, which one of these is it? Like, honestly, the answer just doesn't matter because both narratives are literally powered by the same spook. Let's look at, for example, Eliezer Yudkowsky, I think is his name, or Kowski, who's the founder of Less Wrong and kind of one of the loudest AI doom prophets. Earlier this year, he wrote in Time magazine, "If we go ahead on this, everyone will die." And dude, this is an actual quote. Like, this dude was not exaggerating. This is actually what he believes. Meanwhile, there's people like Sam Altman who is telling Congress that, you know, quote, "My worst fear is that we cause significant, we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world." And then in the same breath, for some reason, he rolled out new AI products. So, you know, like, build the doomsday machine, but regulate it after launch, I guess. It's just so silly. You know, the spook thrives on this paradox. AI is progress incarnate, either as salvation or apocalypse. So fragility, contradiction, and incoherence are all kind of denied in favor of the myth that we are heading toward a singularity of some kind, even if it's collapse. And then there's transhumanism. Do you remember the 2045 initiative where this Russian billionaire, Dmitry Itskov, promised that he will create avatars for people to live in and achieve cybernetic immortality? That was back in 2011, which means by his timeline, we're only 20 years away from uploading ourselves into holograms. And who knows, maybe this is gonna happen, but like, okay, let's just see, like, relax. This is progress as literal afterlife, like Christianity with a server farm instead of heaven. And at its core is this sheer terror at fragility, at reality. Iskov himself even said, quote, "Within the next 30 years, I'm going to make sure that we can all live forever." But spoiler alert, he hasn't uploaded anyone yet. Honestly, is this the kind of person, a person who's so insanely afraid of dying, is this the kind of person you want to, like, give your future to? Is this the kind of person you want to listen to for your sanity right now in the moment? The deeper truth is this: progress functions as denial of death. So the spook is all about, you don't have to be fragile, you don't have to die, technology will rescue you. And in terms of philosophy, we have accelerationism. So there's this guy, Nick Land, who I'm sure you've seen videos about, and I'm not going to talk about everything that he's doing. Just, if you want his biography, read Wikipedia. If you want his thought, just watch some YouTube videos. So Nick Land wrote in his 1992 essay, Machinic Desire, "Capitalism is the engine, not the enemy. It is the very process of dissolution." So for Land, speeding up capitalism is the thing that we should be doing. It kind of reveals its truth in a sense, and maybe even erases the human self, which is what he kind of talks about. And then on the left, you have writers like Nick Sneerczyk, I think is his name, and Alex Williams, who wrote the book Inventing the Future, who kind of argue that technology can be accelerated toward collective liberation, like post-work, automation, universal basic income. But both sides, left and right, are possessed by the same spook. Essentially, progress as inevitability, right? There's like no other way. This is just what they see. They treat history as an escalator that only moves one way, and that logic bleeds into political polarization more broadly. So every election is framed as like the future itself being on the line, and, you know, democracy will die if the other side wins, and paradise awaits if our side does. It kind of just takes you away from the moment. It takes you away from yourself. But what is actually denied here is fragility and contradiction. That sometimes history is messy and slow and incoherent and even stagnant. That there isn't one future, but actually many fragile presents that are going on right now. Focus is a powerful thing. But let's talk about the billionaire profits. We have Elon Musk, who said in 2021, either we spread Earth to other planets or we risk going extinct. He also told Joe Rogan, if humanity doesn't land on Mars in my lifetime, I'll be very disappointed. Then we have people like Peter Thiel, who wrote in his book 0 to 1, indefinite optimism means expecting a better future but being unable to do anything specific to make it happen. And his genius solution seems to be monopoly, planning, and control. And we have people like Sam Altman, who in his blog Moore's Law for Everything wrote, the cost of intelligence and energy, the two most fundamental inputs, will fall by 1,000,000 times. This will change the economy so drastically that it's hard to imagine the full range of consequences. So the translation would be, progress will do all the work, just trust the curve. And what unites them, in my opinion, is that they embody the spook of progress in human form, right? In the form of spectacle even. They're not just businessmen, they're prophets. Musk points to Mars, Thiel to monopolies, Altman to AI abundance. So their authority isn't based on results. Mars is still far away. Monopolies destroy creativity. AI abundance looks suspiciously like AI hype. What they sell is the spectacle of progress. And then there's the endless cycle of hype. Remember when the metaverse was going to change everything, and like Zuckerberg told us in 21 that, quote, the metaverse will be the successor of the mobile internet? Now, 2 years later, Meta's Horizon Worlds is, basically a ghost town. Crypto was going to decentralize finance, remember? Sam Bankman-Fried told investors that we are at the very beginning of a new era in finance. That was right before the FTX collapsed in one of the biggest frauds in history. And now AI is the new boom. And when that fizzles, there'll be another. Spook demands constant novelty. Not because the products are revolutionary, but because the narrative of revolution has to keep moving forward. So progress is like a treadmill disguised as a rocket. And even the internet itself has been narrated as progress. Web 1, which was like static. Then we had Web 2, which was social. And then Web 3, which was decentralized. Chris Nixon of A16Z wrote, Web 3 is the internet owned by the builders and users orchestrated with tokens. And this sounds noble, but in practice, most people just got rug pulled by NFT scams, So this stages of the internet story is actually not neutral at all. It's literally marketing. It convinces us that each stage is a necessary improvement over the last, even if what we actually get is worse interfaces, more ads, and more surveillance. So progress colonizes our memory. It rewrites the past as primitive so that the present can feel like destiny. So here we are, and we're drowning in symptoms of progress dysphoria. We have AI panic, transhumanist immortality cults, accelerationist politics, billionaire profits, endless tech bubbles that are really just spectacle, and the mythologized internet. Different flavors of the same spook. And the thing that unites them is the denial of fragility, contradiction, and incoherence. So the promise that we're heading somewhere definite, even as reality stumbles, contradicts itself, and falls apart in ways that can't be smoothed over. So progress has become a spectacle that promises us a future to escape into, instead of allowing us to live in the present. And that's why it's a spook. Because it rules us, it terrifies us, it seduces us, and never actually arrives. It just continues being a spectacle that you are consuming and then selling to yourself. So let's move on to the next layer. If these are the symptoms, like what's the underlying disease? In the next segment, Dissecting the Spook, I'm going to dig into the structure of progress itself and into the thinkers and billionaires who've given us its most polished, most paranoid version. The Spook of the Week showed us the cultural symptoms, then it's time to dig a little deeper now. So what actually makes progress progress? Why does this idea keep returning like a spook, like a ghost, demanding our loyalty? Here's my claim. Progress is not just change, it's not just innovation. Progress is change framed as destiny. So it's a story that denies fragility, contradiction, and incoherence. It wants us to believe that history is moving in one direction and that the future can be secured and that randomness and mortality can be conquered. So to see how this spook works, let's look at it through 5 lenses. Immortality and anti-fragility, acceleration and time control, prediction and surveillance, monopoly futures, and the engineer hero myth. And along the way, we're going to meet some of the philosophers and billionaires and billionaire philosophers who embodied this exact haunting. I think I want to start with Nick Bostrom. Nick Bostrom is an Oxford philosopher who basically built the field of existential risk studies. And what does that mean? Well, it's the study of threats that could wipe out humanity completely, like nuclear war, AI, pandemics, asteroid strikes, things like that. And for Bostrom, I would say the survival of humanity is kind of held as the highest moral priority. In his 2005 essay, The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant, he kind of imagines death as a monster that humanity kind of has to slay. He actually writes in this text, death is not natural and not acceptable. It is the monster in the story that we must gather together to kill. And this isn't just a metaphor. Like, Bostrom really believes death should be treated as a solvable problem, like polio or malaria. He's also written extensively about life extension technologies and brain uploading and artificial intelligence as ways to protect humanity's long-term potential. And honestly, on the surface, it's kind of noble, right? You want to save people. Who wouldn't want fewer people to die? But there's a spook here. And the spook is very obvious. Fragility and mortality themselves are framed as errors. The human condition is treated as unacceptable. Progress just means erasing death. And that's why Bostrom's philosophy is so seductive to people, It makes us feel guilty for accepting fragility. If you die, then it's like you failed, If you don't sign up for life extension, you're betraying the species. Progress becomes a moral commandment, right? Thou shalt not die. But now let's talk about accelerationism. The basic idea is this. Instead of resisting capitalism, maybe we should push it to its absolute limit and see what happens. So on the right here, we have Nick Land. Nick Land is, again, please just read the Wikipedia and watch other videos. There's tons of them. Nick Land is a British philosopher, kind of turned, like cyberpunk prophet. He argued in the 1990s that capitalism is like an alien intelligence that's moving faster and faster and eating up everything in its path. In his essay from 1994, he writes, "Machinic revolution must therefore go in the opposite direction to socialistic regulation, pressing toward ever more uninhibited marketization of processes." So the translation here is, don't let capitalism slow down. Just speed it up. Let it dissolve human subjectivity itself. So progress here is acceleration, not improvement. And on the left, you have thinkers like Sneerchik, I don't know how to say that shit, and Williams, who in their book Inventing the Future from 2015 argued for a different kind of acceleration, like one that uses automation and technology to free us from work and redistribute resources and build post-capitalist society. So you have two visions, you have right accelerationism, which is like capital as self-dissolving engine, and then left accelerationism, which is like using acceleration for liberation, but both are possessed by the spook of progress, obviously, right? They both imagine history as a speeding escalator carrying us towards some final destination. Then there's Mark Fisher, who kind of gave us a different perspective. In Ghosts of My Life, he coined the term hauntology. And what that means is it's the sense of living in a future that feels canceled in a way. So Fisher describes it as being haunted by lost possibilities, right? Futures that we were promised but we never got. He wrote, quote, "The slow cancellation of the future has been accompanied by a deflation of expectations." So while Land kind of embraced the frenzy of acceleration, Fisher felt really trapped in its absence. So this is like the more emotional symptom of these accelerationist ideas. But all of these ideas reveal the same spook, which is that progress is supposed to be inevitable. And if it's missing, we feel despair. If it's too fast, we feel vertigo. Either way, fragility and incoherence are denied. The next lens I want to look at is prediction and control. So I don't know if you know who Alex Karp is. Alex Karp is the CEO of Palantir, who runs a surveillance and data company that sells itself as protecting nations from chaos. He wrote in a shareholder letter, "The preservation of our way of life depends on the ability to anticipate, prevent, and respond to otherwise unforeseeable events." And I want you to think about that. He's saying that survival depends on predicting the unpredictable. This is the spook of progress, literally, in its absolute fucking beauty. Nothing random can ever be allowed. Every accident has to be foreseen. Every fragility has to be eliminated. There has to be full control. Now, to look at the other side, I want to use Sam Altman again, who's the CEO of OpenAI, as you probably know. And he takes a similar stance, but in a very different key. In his 2023 testimony before Congress, he said, "If this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong." But still, OpenAI is continuing like this insane race forward, right? It's just releasing models faster than regulators can even respond. So I don't know. What are you talking about, man? So this contradiction is the spook in action. So accelerate progress and then claim you'll control it, right? I mean, that seems just, it almost seems like a fucking agenda if you ask me. So the denial of fragility is obvious here, right? Progress means prediction, governance, foresight. But what's really happening is just panic that's like dressed up as destiny. Now, let's look at monopolies. Monopoly futures elite exceptionalism with my best friend, my best man, I absolutely hate this guy. I think he would have been an emperor in the Roman Empire. Peter Thiel offers another face of the spook, in my opinion. In his book, 0 to 1, he argues that most people are indefinite optimists. That's what he calls them. They believe that the future will be better, but they can't say how. Thiel kind of contrasts this with definite optimism, which he defines as the belief that, quote, the future will be better and we have a plan to make it so. For Thiel, progress is not just random innovation. It's planned, it's monopolized, and executed by visionary. That's why he praises monopolies so much, right? Competition is for losers. This is something he actually said. So to him, real progress requires concentrated power. And Thiel's philosophy is shaped by the philosophy of René Girard, who taught him personally that human desire is imitative and prone to rivalry. So Thiel took this to mean that progress requires order, very German if you ask me. So someone has to rise above rivalry and control the field. And for him, that's the role of the monopolist. So I don't know what's going on here. Let's go back to progress. Progress is domination. In this case, progress as the denial of incoherence. So if competition is fragile and chaotic, then just eliminate it. Build monopolies, direct history, impose coherence. It's progress as authoritarian planning. Then finally we have Elon Musk. Musk embodies progress as frontier, if you want to look at it that way. He often frames Earth as fragile and doomed to collapse unless we escape. At the International Astronautical Congress in 2016, he declared, either we spread Earth to other planets or we risk going extinct as a species. And this is the classic engineer hero myth. So Musk casts himself as the savior who will overcome fragility by building rockets to Mars. It's the old American myth of manifest destiny, but in a cosmic way. So progress here means colonizing new frontiers, transcending the limits of Earth. But if you look closer, it's literally the same denial. Instead of accepting fragility, Musk promises an escape hatch. Instead of living with incoherence, he sells us, and I'm pretty sure himself, the idea of Mars. So what's the core of the spook? Across all these lenses. Bostrom's immortality and Land and Fisher's acceleration, Karp and Altman's prediction, Thiel's monopolies, Musk's Mars. The same structure repeats. Progress is defined by denial. Denial of death, denial of randomness, denial of fragility, denial of contradiction. Progress insists the future has to be coherent and inevitable and secured. But there's an irony here. And the irony is that progress is not just an idea. It's actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if we all act like progress is inevitable, then we build institutions and technologies and ideologies to sustain the illusion. But the prophecy can be broken. It doesn't have to hold. History doesn't have to be progressive. It also doesn't have to be cyclic. It doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to exist at all. Personhood doesn't have to be stable. Scientific advancement doesn't have to be a moral destiny. We can actually literally just choose to live otherwise right now as individuals. And here's the paradox. Capitalism itself might already be doing the work of dissolving the self. This is something that Nick Land talked about, and Mark Fisher mourned it. But it's different for egoist thinkers like Shenna. If capitalism erodes the illusion of a stable subject, then maybe that is not entirely a loss at all, because the opposite of progress isn't stagnation or regression, it's ownness. So maybe it's not so bad? I don't know. What makes progress progress? It's not change, it's not innovation. In my opinion, it's the denial of fragility. It's the attempt to overwrite randomness with destiny, mortality with immortality, and incoherence with forced coherence. And that's why I can't respect it. I just keep looking at the spectacle, at the people who are freaking out about this and the people who are producing its narrative. And I just keep thinking, okay, so what? And I think that's why it's a spook, because it haunts us with the promise of inevitability while stealing our ability to live right now without having to be confronted with this. In the next segment, I want to turn inward. If progress is a spook that rules us, how does it rule us psychologically? And how has the psyche itself built a trap that keeps us locked into the fantasy of history, of the we? And more importantly, is there a way to escape? If progress is a spook, then the question becomes, why do we keep obeying it? Why do we feel like we owe ourselves to history or to the future or to the collective we? And I think the answer lies in the psyche. So progress doesn't just live out there in speeches by billionaires or in tech manifestos. It actually takes root inside of us. It becomes a voice and like a compulsion and a demand. And I think to unspook this idea of progress, we have to see how our minds have been wired to keep that alive. So let's start with the superego. In psychoanalysis, the superego is the internalized voice of authority. So the echo of parents, teachers, institutions, culture that tells us what we have to do. And it's not the calm conscience that whispers right from wrong at all. Like, how it's always like pictured as like the devil and the angel on the shoulder. It's more like a drill sergeant crossed with a guilty conscience. So when it comes to progress, the superego is very loud and very clear. You have to advance, you have to improve, you have to optimize, you have to be more than you are right now in this moment. That's why even in our private lives, we kind of talk about progress a lot. We ask, am I progressing in my career? Am I progressing in therapy? Is my relationship progressing? The superego kind of demands that life will be measured on a linear scale, as if fragility, contradiction, and incoherence are signs of failure. But there's a cruel trick here. The superego never shuts up. Even if you progress, you could literally become the richest man alive. Just look at him. Just look at him for a second. Does that man look content? Does he? Even if you progress, it just raises the bar, man. You lose weight, you get a job, you publish a book, and the voice immediately asks, okay, what's next? Because progress becomes endless deferral. You're never enough because you're never there yet. Now I want to also look at the idea of the big other. Look, it's a Lacanian idea, but Slavoj Žižek also talks about it. So this is a bit abstract, but here's a simple way to understand it. The big other is the imagined authority that we believe is kind of watching, judging, and structuring our action. And it's not a person, it's not even God. technically. It's more like the symbolic order, right? Society, history, culture. It's all condensed into one imaginary figure that we feel accountable to. So progress feeds on this big other. When politicians say we're moving forward as a society, who the hell is we? When billionaires claim we have to secure the future of humanity, who the fuck is humanity? It's the big other in action. It's the idea of the we. This phantom collective that demands that we sacrifice the present for some imaginary audience in the future. And we obey it because we don't want to disappoint the big other. It's unacceptable in our minds. We want to believe that someone is keeping score and that our sacrifices matter and that progress is being recorded in some cosmic ledger. But the big other doesn't exist. It's a spook. But our psyche keeps it alive because without it, we are fragile. Freud also talked about defense mechanisms, so the unconscious tricks that we play on ourselves to avoid painful truths. And in my opinion, progress is largely built on them. So we have denial. Like what we do is we pretend fragility doesn't exist by saying things like we'll conquer death, we'll solve aging. Then we have displacement. So moving fear of mortality into other domains. AI might kill us all. Kind of functions as a displaced version of I will die someday. We have projection, right? We blame others for fragility. They are holding society back from progress. Then we have sublimation. Oh, sublimation is a big one. Like, for example, turning the fear of fragility into grand projects. Like, I will build a rocket to Mars. I'll create superintelligence, I'll reform the economy. All of these defenses protect us from the unbearable fact that we are fragile, contradictory, incoherent beings. Progress offers itself as the ultimate defense, which is a story where fragility will one day be overcome. And this is where I want to bring in Stjärna. In The Ego in Its Own, he writes, we aspire to a life apart. What does that mean? Stjärna is not advocating total isolation. He's not saying go live in a cave, okay? A life apart means a life not enslaved to the collective, not beholden to the spooks of we or progress. It means stepping out of the story that says you have to be part of history, that your worth is measured by how much you contribute to some collective destiny. For Stjärna, Ownness is about living for yourself, here and now, in the moment, without sacrificing yourself to abstraction. And that doesn't mean you reject relationships or projects or creation. He came up with the union of ego as concept to make sure that we don't think that. It means you reject the obligation to serve history, to advance humanity, to prove your life has progressive value. So how do we live ownness in the face of progress? The real psychic trap is the word we. We are making progress. We must fight for the future. We are on the right side of history. This we is a fiction. It's a collective mask that hides fragility. Because if I say, I am fragile, I will die, I cannot guarantee the future, that feels unbearable. But if I dissolve into we, then fragility feels less threatening and more hopeful. We will continue. We will advance. Legacy, blah, blah, blah. We will survive. And this we is stupid. To use Stjärna's own bluntness, it's just straight up stupid. It's an illusion that chains us to history. It makes us live for an abstraction instead of living our ownness right now, here, doing whatever the fuck incoherent, weird ass shit I want to do. So how do we live ownness in the face of progress? Well, I would say first by recognizing that the superego's demand to advance is endless and literally unwinnable. The progress voice is a trap. The more you obey it, the louder it gets. Second, by refusing the big other's gaze. History is not keeping score. Okay, nobody cares. You're not, you are just you. Okay, there's no cosmic record of how much you contributed to progress. This planet will eventually implode. Come on, man. Third, by facing fragility instead of denying it. Ownness means affirming contradiction and incoherence and mortality. It means saying, I do not need to be a part of a collective destiny. I do not need to be useful to history. I am enough in my ownness. Enough, by the way, is a fucking spook. And this is not easy. It feels super vulnerable. It means letting go of the comfort of we. It means looking directly at fragility without the safety net of progress. But it's also liberating. It gives you strength. It gives you power. Vulnerability is power. Because once you step outside the trap, you realize the opposite of progress is not regression. It is liberation. So the psyche builds a giant trap. A superego that commands progress, a big other that pretends to watch over us, and defenses that deny fragility, and the illusion of a collective we that demands our loyalty. But Stjärna shows us another path. We aspire to a life apart, a life not enslaved to progress, not obligated to history, not trapped in the superego's demand to become more, a life of ownness. Now in the next segment, the spotlight, I'm going to bring this down to earth by analyzing the writings of the Antichrist himself, Peter Thiel, and Sam Altman. Two men who, in very different ways, embody the neurosis of progress perfectly, and whose words reveal just how much fear and fragility this spook is hiding. Alright, let's end this episode by putting two of the loudest voices of technological progress side by side. Peter Thiel and Sam Altman. So Thiel is the philosopher turned investor who insists the future has to be planned and monopolized. And Altman is the startup evangelist who insists that AI will give us abundance, but also probably, definitely, maybe is going to kill us. Both men embody the spook of progress in different forms, and when we put their words next to each other, it kind of becomes clear what they're selling isn't confidence, it's neurosis. So Peter Thiel's worldview comes through very sharply in his 2009 essay, The Education of a Libertarian. In this text he wrote, quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." That's the core of Thiel's thought, and I have no problem with criticizing democracy, trust me. So he doesn't trust fragility, right? The messiness of democracy, the randomness of public life. For him, progress requires escape, right? Seasteads and outer space and cyberspace. So places where history can be reset and controlled by visionaries and not the mob as he thinks of them as. Then in his text 0 to 1, which is like his famous book, he develops this further. So he distinguishes between indefinite optimism, which is like the vague hope that the future will be better without knowing how, and definite optimism, is where you plan, monopolize, and engineer the future directly. So he writes, quote, "A startup is the largest endeavor over which you can have definite mastery. You can't control the future of the world, but you can control the future of your company." So Thiel's obsession is control. For him, progress only counts if it's definite, planned, and monopolized. So fragility, like democracy, like competition, like randomness, is the enemy. Now let's look at Sam Altman. He wrote a blog post in 2021 on his blog Moore's Law for Everything, where he wrote, "The cost of intelligence and energy, the two most fundamental inputs, will fall by 1,000,000 times. This will change the economy so drastically that it's hard to imagine the full range of consequences." So for Altman, AI is the ultimate engine of progress. So it's going to reduce the cost of everything, create abundance, and like unlock a new economic order, basically. So where Thiel kind of sees progress as something to monopolize, he sees it as something to accelerate until scarcity itself disappears. But Altman's optimism is also undercut by his constant doubting what he's saying, in a sense, like his constant fear. So in his 2023 testimony before Congress, he said, "My worst fear is that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world." So here's a contradiction. Accelerate AI as fast as possible, but admit it might destroy everything too. So kind of get yourself out of all of that. Build the doomsday machine and then ask governments to regulate it after the fact. So Altman's progress is kind of riddled with dread, the fear that abundance is just one step away from apocalypse. Now, if we put these two voices next to each other, there's something fascinating that emerges here. So Thiel says progress has to be definite, controlled, and monopolized. And Altman says progress has to be accelerated, distributed, and cushioned. But both are terrified of fragility. So Thiel is haunted by the randomness of democracy and competition, and Altman is haunted by the randomness of AI spiraling out of control. The one wants to freeze history under monopoly, and the other wants to speed it up into abundance. But the spook at the core is the same. Progress is the denial of contradiction, incoherence, and fragility. This is unacceptable to them. And these aren't just personal quirks. They come from deep philosophical lineages. Thiel studied under René Girard at Stanford and absorbed the idea that human rivalry always leads to chaos unless authority imposes order, basically. And that's why he hates competition and loves monopoly. And progress for Thiel is the triumph of authority over chaos. And then Altman is shaped by Silicon Valley's startup culture, right? A culture of acceleration, disruption, and risk-taking, but with a veneer of safety layered on top. So progress for Altman is like a roller coaster. It's thrilling and terrifying, but supposedly inevitable. And both of them kind of speak the language of progress while revealing their own anxieties. So Thiel, is terrified of democratic fragility, and Altman is terrified of technological fragility. And both respond the same way, which is by clinging to the spook of inevitability. So what do we learn when we listen closely? Thiel dreams of monopolies because he can't tolerate incoherence. Like, his whole philosophy is a defense mechanism against fragility. And Altman dreams of AI abundance because he can't tolerate uncertainty. So his whole philosophy is a defense mechanism against contradiction. And both men speak as though they're prophets, but they're really just anxious children of progress that are haunted by the same fear, which is that fragility is real, that the future is not guaranteed, and that incoherence is unavoidable. And here's where Stjärna kind of cuts through this. Progress does not own us. We don't have to live for Thiel's monopolies or Altman's accelerations. We don't have to sacrifice our lives to the we of humanity's destiny. Ownness means stepping outside their neurosis. It means accepting fragility and contradiction and incoherence, and refusing to let someone else's vision of progress define the meaning of our lives. Because the opposite of progress is not stagnation, it's ownness. It means accepting fragility, contradiction, and incoherence in the most radical way, and refusing to let someone else's vision of progress define the meaning of our lives. And this doesn't mean, once they have a holographic version of you, to say no to it. That's not what it means. It just means don't let the abstract ideal of it own you. So let's step back. We've looked at the cultural symptoms of progress dysphoria, the AI panic, the billionaire profits, the endless tech bubbles, and we've dissected the spook itself through Bostrom and Land and Fisher and Thiel and Altman and Musk and Karp and all these people. And we've explored how the psyche keeps us locked in the superego and the big other and the fantasy of we. And what we keep seeing over and over is the same thing. Progress is built on denial. Denial of fragility, denial of incoherence, and denial of contradiction. But here's the thing. Fragility is not a flaw in need of fixing. It's the ground of our existence. Because we are fragile. We contradict ourselves. And our lives are incoherent in ways that no system of progress will ever resolve. And maybe that's okay. So this is the part where I want to be honest with you. I feel the pull of progress too. I'm sick of working. I want to just sit here and make these podcast episodes all the time. I want to creatively express myself. So I listen to people like Sam Altman say that shit that he says, and I think, oh my God, maybe. And I also feel the anxiety when people say AI might destroy us all, or that democracy is collapsing, even though I fucking hate democracy, or that if we don't upload ourselves into the cloud, we're wasting our chance at immortality, or the dangers of uploading yourself. It's tempting to believe in the spook because the spook gives us comfort. It gives us a sense of direction and a sense of inevitability. But that comfort comes at a price because it chains us to history. It makes us live for a collective we that doesn't exist. And it keeps us on a treadmill of becoming, never arriving and never being in the moment, never being enough for ourselves, never being connected with ourselves. But I want to think that there's another way. And for this, I tend to go back to Stjärna's quote, "We aspire to a life apart." So not a life cut off from others, but a life free of spooks. A life where I don't need to justify my existence by serving progress or humanity or history, and a life where fragility, contradiction, and incoherence aren't enemies to be defeated, but actually like companions that help me be in the present. And this, to me, is the real unspooking of progress. It's not about offering some grand narrative. It's not about saying, forget progress, here's a better destiny. It's about refusing destiny altogether. It's about halting the spook in its tracks and stepping outside its demand. Because the opposite of progress is not stagnation, and it's not regression. It's not decline. The opposite of progress is ownness. So here's the line I want to leave you with. Fragility doesn't need to be conquered. Contradiction doesn't need to be erased. I don't need to be part of a we that marches through history. My life is right now, here, mine. And once you see that, then the spook loses its hold. Alright friends, thank you for listening to this episode of the Spookcast. If you enjoyed it, the best way you can support the show is by sharing it with someone you think that would get something out of it, or just by leaving a review wherever you're listening, or, disliking, or, wait, can you dislike? Yes, you can dislike, or comment, or rant, whatever you want to do, please feel free to do it. You can also subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. If you want to go deeper into these ideas, you can also check out my writing on my Substack. I tend to share links in the posts. You can also find it, of course, in my bio. And you can sign up for the Patreon if you want to. And of course, if you want to keep the conversation going, you can find me on your preferred social media. All right, until next time. Remember not to let the spooks get you.